People often mistake silence for weakness. They fail to understand that sometimes silence isn't empty space. It is a storm, gathering its power, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash its fury and sweep away everything in its path. In the grand, glittering ballroom of the annual Sterling Corp Gala, the air was thick with the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and manufactured pleasantries, the very opposite of silence. And in a quiet corner, almost blending into the shadows cast by a large potted fern, stood Ethan, a man who had mastered the art of being unseen. He watched the spectacle, a ghost at his own company's feast. He heard his name before he saw them. It was carried on a wave of laughter, a sharp, cruel sound that cut through the dull roar of the party. His boss, Julian Vance, a man who radiated the kind of effortless charm that made people forgive his arrogance, was holding court, and beside him, bathed in his glow, was Ethan's wife, Sarah. "No, I'm serious," Julian chuckled, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "The guy in accounting, the quiet one, works on the 5th floor. I swear, I can never remember his name. Walter? Edward?" A few people in the circle snickered, but Ethan's eyes were locked on his wife. Sarah laughed. It wasn't a polite, strained laugh of a wife defending her husband's honor. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh of pure amusement, a sound of admiration for the man telling the joke. Her eyes sparkled as she looked up at Julian, a look of adoration that Ethan hadn't seen directed his way in years. In that single, shattering moment, a chilling cold seeped into Ethan's bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It wasn't the hot rage of humiliation. It was something far deeper, an abyss of cold, clear understanding. Julian forgetting his name was a slight. Sarah's laugh was a verdict. It confirmed the terrifying truth that his invisibility wasn't just a workplace phenomenon. It was the reality of his own life, in his own marriage. He was a ghost in his own home. The vibrant noise of the party faded into a distant hum. The world fell away, leaving only the image of his wife's smiling face. A smile that was not for him. The storm inside Ethan, silent and unnoticed for so long, finally began to gather its wind. To understand the man who would eventually bring an empire to its knees, you must first understand the life he lived in the quiet before the storm. Ethan was 35 years old, and his world was one of numbers. For others, numbers were cold, impersonal things. For Ethan, they were the ultimate truth. They never lied. They balanced perfectly. A spreadsheet was a sanctuary. A ledger was a sacred text. In the chaos of human emotion, in the unpredictable currents of life, the clean, absolute logic of accounting was his anchor. He wasn't a man of grand gestures or loud opinions. He was a man of quiet observation and meticulous detail. He noticed the small crack in the pavement that everyone else stepped over, the subtle shift in a colleague's tone that hinted at a project going sideways, the precise amount of sugar Sarah liked in her morning coffee. His mind was a finely tuned instrument, designed not for the stage, but for the silent, crucial work that happens behind the curtain. This quiet nature was precisely what had drawn Sarah to him 10 years ago. She had been a whirlwind of energy, a splash of vibrant color in his monochrome existence. "You're so calm," she used to tell him, her head resting on his chest. "You make the world feel safe. You're my anchor." And he had believed her. He had loved her with a fierce, steady devotion that was as reliable as the sunrise. He saw her ambition not as a threat, but as the beautiful, soaring kite to his steady hand on the string. Together, he thought, they were perfectly balanced. He was the foundation. She was the beautiful structure they built upon it. Their life was a testament to his careful planning. The house in the suburbs, with its neat lawn and white picket fence, wasn't an accident. It was the result of years of savings, of Ethan meticulously tracking every dollar, foregoing personal luxuries to build a future for them. He remembered the day they closed on the house. Sarah had cried with joy, hugging him so tightly he could barely breathe. "We did it, Ethan," she whispered. "You did it." He had insulated the attic himself, laid the stone path in the backyard, and spent an entire summer building a small deck where they would drink iced tea on warm evenings. Every nail he hammered, every bill he paid, was an act of love, a silent vow to protect and provide. He didn't need public praise. The quiet contentment on her face was all the reward he ever wanted. He thought she understood that. He thought she saw his silence not as an absence of passion, but as its deepest, most constant form. But there was another entry in the ledger of his life, one that never quite balanced. His mother-in-law, Eleanor. Eleanor was a woman sculpted from expensive fabrics and casual disdain. She measured the world in square footage and horsepower. From the very beginning, she had viewed Ethan as a sensible but deeply uninspired investment for her daughter. Her compliments were always laced with poison. "This house is lovely, Ethan," she would say, running a manicured finger over a countertop. "So practical. It's a wonderful starter home." They had lived there for 7 years. At family dinners, she would artfully steer the conversation towards the accomplishments of her friends' sons-in-law, the doctors, the lawyers, the tech entrepreneurs. Then she would turn to Ethan, her eyes filled with a pity that felt sharper than any insult, and ask, "And how are things in the world of numbers, dear?" She spoke of his profession as if it were a quaint but slightly embarrassing hobby, like collecting stamps. In the early years, Sarah would leap to his defense. "Mother, Ethan is brilliant at what he does. He's the reason we have all this." But over time, her defenses grew weaker, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. That silence, he now realized, was the sound of her allegiance shifting. Eleanor's constant, dripping poison had eroded the foundation of their marriage in ways Ethan had never allowed himself to calculate. She planted the seed of doubt in Sarah's mind, the idea that she had settled, that the steady, reliable man she had married was not a rock, but a cage, holding her back from the glittering life she truly deserved. And Julian Vance, with his charismatic smile and extravagant lifestyle, was the living embodiment of that glittering life. Eleanor adored Julian. She would mention his name at every opportunity, recounting stories she'd heard from Sarah about his latest business triumph, his trip to Milan, his new sports car. She was grooming her daughter, not consciously perhaps, but with the relentless instinct of a woman who believed her child was destined for a higher tax bracket. Looking back, Ethan could see it all with a horrifying clarity. He wasn't just fighting an affair. He was fighting a deeply ingrained value system, a world where his quiet competence would never be worth as much as Julian's flashy success. His love, his stability, his devotion, they had all been entered on the wrong side of the balance sheet in Sarah's heart, depreciating in value year after year until they were worth nothing at all. He was the invisible man, the forgotten name, because in their world of dazzling surfaces, a man of quiet, solid substance simply didn't register. The laughter at the party was not the beginning. It was merely the final, brutal entry in a ledger book that Ethan had been unconsciously keeping for months. It was the number that made the entire column of his life add up to a devastating sum he could no longer ignore. As he drove home that night, with Sarah sitting in the passenger seat in a contented, wine-flushed silence, his mind, the meticulous, detail-oriented mind of an accountant, began an involuntary audit. He had been flagging discrepancies for a long time, small inconsistencies that he had dutifully filed away under miscellaneous or explain later. He had told himself that a happy marriage did not require a forensic examination. He had been wrong. A marriage built on lies demanded one. The audit began with the late nights. It had started subtly, about 8 months ago. A text message around 6 in the evening. "Hey, have to stay late. Julian wants to brainstorm the Q3 projections. Don't wait up." The first time, Ethan had felt a pang of pride. His wife was valuable. Her boss recognized her talent. He had made her favorite pasta, kept it warm in the oven, and greeted her with a smile when she finally dragged herself through the door after 10, looking exhausted but exhilarated. But then the late nights became a recurring event, a standing appointment in their lives. Q3 projections bled into Q4 planning, which then became prepping for the merger. The excuses were always plausible, always wrapped in the language of corporate ambition that he knew Sarah found so intoxicating. He remembered one night in particular, a cold Tuesday in February. It was their anniversary. He had booked a table at the small Italian restaurant where he had proposed. At 5:30, she called. Her voice was rushed. "Ethan, I am so sorry. Julian just dropped a massive deadline on us. We have to pull an all-nighter. I can't get out of it." He had sat at the kitchen table, the 2 unlit candles and the bottle of expensive wine mocking him. He didn't get angry. He just felt a profound and hollow loneliness. He called the restaurant to cancel, the hostess's sympathetic voice feeling like a fresh wound. He went to bed alone. She came home just before 3 in the morning. He pretended to be asleep, listening to her quiet movements in the dark. She didn't smell like the stale coffee and recycled air of their office. She smelled of the cold night air, a faint trace of expensive wine, and a sharp, floral perfume that he didn't recognize. The scent lingered in the room long after she had slipped into bed, leaving a cold, empty space between them. That scent was a discrepancy he could not reconcile. Then there was the digital evidence, the small fortress she had built around her phone. Sarah had once been an open book. They shared everything. But a few months ago, that changed. He had picked up her phone from the kitchen counter to pass it to her, and the screen lit up with a notification from Julian V. The message preview was short, but it was enough. "Last night was incredible." Before Ethan could even process the words, Sarah had lunged across the island and snatched the phone from his hand, her face a mask of panic. "It's about the Henderson account," she had said, her voice a little too high. "We landed it. He's just enthusiastic." She had laughed a brittle, unconvincing laugh. The next day, her phone had a new passcode. She began to angle the screen away from him whenever she texted, a small, subtle movement that felt like a slammed door. The whispered phone calls started soon after. She would see his name light up her screen, and her entire demeanor would shift. She would quickly walk into the laundry room or step out onto the back deck, closing the door behind her. He could hear the low, intimate murmur of her voice, punctuated by soft laughter. The laughter hurt the most. It was a sound of unguarded joy, a sound he hadn't heard from her, directed at him, in a very long time. He had tried to ignore it. He told himself he was being insecure, that his own quiet life was making him paranoid about her exciting one. He buried himself in his work, finding comfort in the clear, unambiguous world of profit and loss. But the evidence wasn't just at home. It was there at the office, hiding in plain sight. Because he was the invisible man, he saw things no one else did. He saw the way Julian would stop by Sarah's desk, leaning in close, his hand resting on the small of her back as he pointed to something on her screen. He saw the way Sarah would look up at him, her professional smile melting into something softer, more personal. He saw them in the break room, their heads bent close together over a single coffee cup, sharing a private joke while the rest of the office buzzed around them. He saw the lingering glances in long, boring meetings, a silent conversation passing between them that excluded everyone else in the room. Each glance was a footnote, each touch a data point. He had once interpreted these signs as professional camaraderie. He had been proud of her for having such a strong relationship with the boss. He saw now that he had been reading the report upside down. It wasn't mentorship, it was intimacy. It was a conspiracy of two, carried out in hallways and conference rooms, right under his nose. Now, sitting in the silence of his car, with the sound of Sarah's breathing beside him, the audit was complete. Every late night, every whispered call, every shared glance, and finally, that laugh. They were not separate events. They were a meticulously documented trail of betrayal. The cracks were not cracks, they were chasms. And he finally understood that he had been standing on crumbling ground for a very, very long time. The nail in the coffin of Ethan's marriage was not hammered in a secret hotel room, but across the polished mahogany of his mother-in-law's dining table. Sunday dinners at Eleanor's were a mandatory ritual, a performance of family unity that felt as hollow as the cavernous, immaculately clean rooms of her house. The house itself was less a home and more a museum of a life well lived, with every piece of furniture and art chosen to broadcast wealth and impeccable taste. Nothing was out of place, and nothing was comfortable. It was a perfect reflection of its owner. Ethan always felt like a smudge on a pristine painting in that house. Sarah, however, seemed to flourish there, shedding the skin of wife and seamlessly slipping back into the role of Eleanor's perfect daughter. The dinner began, as it always did, with a subtle performance of perfection: the crisp linen napkins, the heavy silverware, the perfectly roasted chicken smelling of rosemary and thyme. And the conversation, as it so often did lately, began with Julian Vance. "Sarah, darling, you must tell me everything about the charity gala," Eleanor began, dabbing her lips with her napkin. "I saw a picture of Julian in the society pages. He looked absolutely dashing. That man wears a tuxedo like he was born in one." Sarah, who had been quiet on the drive over, suddenly lit up. "Oh, it was incredible, Mother." He gave the keynote speech. He had the entire room captivated. He raised over $2 million for the Children's Hospital in under 20 minutes. "Of course he did," Eleanor said, with a sigh of deep satisfaction, as if she herself had earned the applause. "That's the difference between men who build empires and men who don't. It's a kind of energy, a magnetism. You can't learn it. He is a force of nature." Ethan ate his chicken, the knife and fork feeling unnaturally heavy in his hands. He felt a familiar pressure building behind his eyes. He was not a participant in this conversation. He was merely an audience member, a silent witness to the deification of his wife's lover. Eleanor spoke of Julian's recent business trip to Tokyo, the new German sports car he was having imported, the whispers of him being considered for a seat on the board of a major tech company. She recounted these details, fed to her by Sarah, with a proprietary pride. It was a vision of the life she believed her daughter was owed. Then, with the practiced precision of a sniper, she turned her sights on Ethan. "And Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with a sweet, condescending curiosity, "how have you been? We so rarely get to hear about your world." The table fell silent. Sarah froze for a fraction of a second, her fork hovering over her plate. Ethan carefully placed his own fork down. "I've been well, Eleanor. Thank you. Things at the firm are busy?" she pressed, drawing out the word as if it were a foreign concept. "I imagine things are always busy in your line of work. So many little details to keep track of. It must be terribly taxing." "It has its moments," Ethan replied, his voice a flat, even line. He refused to give her any emotional reaction to latch onto. "I was just thinking," Eleanor continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "It's such a fascinating contrast. Julian, a man who paints with the broadest strokes, changing skylines, shifting markets. And you, Ethan, a man who meticulously fills in the tiny details, making sure every last penny is where it should be. The world needs both, I suppose. The visionaries and the bookkeepers." The word hung in the air between them. Bookkeeper. She had managed to reduce his entire career, his expertise, his identity, into a single, dry, uninspired word. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a verbal pat on the head for a simple but necessary little man. This was the moment. The moment for his wife, his partner, the woman who had vowed to love and honor him, to step in. He didn't need a grand defense. A simple mother, "That's unfair," or "Ethan's work is incredibly complex," would have been a lifeline. He slowly lifted his eyes to meet Sarah's across the perfectly set table. He sent her a silent, desperate plea. "See me. Stand with me. Remember us." Sarah saw his look. He knew she did. A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or discomfort passed through her eyes. But it was gone in an instant. She gave a tight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She looked down. She picked up her knife and began to cut her remaining piece of chicken into a dozen tiny, perfect squares, her focus suddenly and completely absorbed by the task. Her silence was not just an absence of support, it was a confirmation. It was her signature on the bottom of Eleanor's assessment. In that moment, watching his wife deliberately refuse to meet his gaze, Ethan felt the last remnants of his love for her turn to ash. The pain was gone, replaced by a profound, chilling clarity. They did not see him. Not his wife, not her mother. They saw a quiet, simple, practical man. A starter home, a sensible car, a bookkeeper. They had created this caricature of him, this ghost at the table, because it made their own choices, their own betrayals, easier to justify. He finished his meal in silence. He answered Eleanor's few remaining questions with polite monosyllables. He played the part they had written for him one last time. As he drove them home, Sarah tried to fill the heavy silence in the car with chatter about a movie she wanted to see. Ethan didn't respond. He just drove, his hands steady on the wheel. The humiliation no longer stung. It had been cauterized by a cold, rising anger. It was a fuel. They had spent the evening discussing the merits of a visionary. They had no idea they were sitting in a car with a man who was, in that very moment, having a vision of his own. A vision of perfect, meticulous, and devastating balance. The days that followed the Sunday dinner were a descent into a gray, silent fog. Ethan moved through his life like a ghost, his own spirit having seemingly departed, leaving only a shell to perform the necessary functions. He went to work. He balanced spreadsheets. He came home. He said goodnight to the stranger who shared his bed. The house, once his sanctuary, now felt like a meticulously crafted stage, set for a play in which he was no longer a leading character. Every object, the photos on the mantel, the deck he had built, the coffee mug Sarah had given him, was an artifact from a dead life. His work, the world of numbers that had always provided such comfort and clarity, now felt like a cruel joke. He was tracking the flow of millions of dollars for a corporation, yet his own worth had been calculated by his wife and her mother and found to be negligible. He was at the bottom of an emotional abyss, a place so quiet and empty that he thought he might simply dissolve into nothingness. It was in this state of profound emptiness, on a Tuesday afternoon, that the phone on his desk rang. He almost didn't answer it. It was a number he didn't recognize, with a prestigious downtown area code. He assumed it was a headhunter or a vendor. He let it ring 3 times before his ingrained sense of duty forced his hand. "Ethan Grant," he answered, his voice flat and lifeless. The voice on the other end was the opposite. It was crisp, formal, and carried the weight of old money and expensive leather. "Mr. Grant, my name is Alistair Finch. I am a senior partner at the law firm of Covington, Finch, and Thorne. I am calling you regarding the estate of your uncle, Mr. Arthur Pendleton." The name barely registered. Arthur Pendleton. It sounded like a name from a dusty old book. Ethan had to dive deep into the archives of his memory. He found a vague, sepia-toned image of a tall, unnervingly quiet man at a family funeral when Ethan was just a boy. His mother's estranged brother. A man spoken of in hushed, intimidated tones. A man who had built a fortune and then vanished from their lives into a self-imposed exile of wealth. "My uncle?" Ethan asked, his voice laced with confusion. "I haven't seen him in nearly 30 years. I believe you have the wrong person." "No, Mr. Grant," the lawyer said, his tone unwavering. "There is no mistake. Mr. Pendleton passed away peacefully last week. He has named you as the sole and total beneficiary of his estate. We need you to come to our offices at your earliest convenience to begin the process." The next day, Ethan found himself sitting in a chair so soft it felt like it might swallow him whole. Mr. Cynic, Inter Cynic Common 40 for Mr. Finch's office was on the top floor of a skyscraper, overlooking the city, like a king surveying his domain. The walls were lined with dark wood and leather-bound books that looked as though they had never been opened. It smelled of power. Mr. Finch, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and a watch worth more than Ethan's car, slid a thick leather-bound portfolio across the vast desk. "Your uncle was a very methodical man, Mr. Grant, and a very private one. He turned a modest inheritance into a global financial empire. He had no wife, no children. As his last living direct relative, it all falls to you." Ethan opened the portfolio. He was an accountant. He was used to numbers. But these were numbers of a different magnitude, a different species entirely. They weren't the neat, orderly figures of a corporate balance sheet. They were dizzying, staggering sums attached to a sprawling list of assets. There were controlling stakes in 3 Silicon Valley tech startups, commercial real estate holdings in New York, London, and Tokyo, a private equity fund based in the Cayman Islands, a stock portfolio so vast and diverse it looked like a map of the entire global economy. There were gold bullion certificates and deeds to properties he had never heard of. He saw a number at the bottom of the final page, a net worth calculation that was so large, his mind initially refused to process it. It was an astronomical figure, a number that didn't belong in the real world. He felt a wave of vertigo, a profound sense of dislocation. This couldn't be real. It was a mistake, a dream, a cruel prank. I don't understand, Ethan stammered, looking up from the pages. Why me? Mr. Finch offered a thin, professional smile. Your uncle's will was very specific, but it did not include an explanation. He was, as I said, a private man. All you need to understand, Mr. Grant, is that as of this moment, you are one of the wealthiest men in this city. Ethan left the office and walked for hours, a ghost moving through the bustling streets of a city that suddenly felt completely different. The portfolio was heavy in his briefcase, a tangible weight of a new reality. His first, fleeting instinct was to call Sarah. To run home, throw the portfolio on the kitchen table, and watch her face as the truth dawned on her. To finally show her, and her mother, that he was not the simple, practical bookkeeper they thought he was. He could give her the world they so desperately craved. He could buy her a life so glittering it would make Julian Vance look like a pauper. He imagined the scene, her shock, her disbelief, and then her sudden, fawning affection. The way she would touch his arm, the new, admiring light in her eyes. The thought made him feel sick to his stomach. Her love would be for the portfolio, for the numbers on the page. It would be a transaction. And that realization was the final, clarifying blow. To reveal his new reality would be to invite her into it, and he knew with absolute certainty that his old life was a house he needed to burn to the ground. Standing at the foot of a towering skyscraper, he looked up at the endless glass and steel, reflecting the afternoon Sunday. He made a decision, a cold, hard, and perfectly logical decision. No one would know, not Sarah, not Eleanor, not a soul. This fortune was not a gift to be shared. It was a tool. It was a weapon. It was a key that could unlock any door, a force that could move any obstacle. He was still Ethan Grant, the Invisible Man. But now, the Invisible Man had an invisible army. An idea began to form in the quiet, calculating part of his mind. An idea as intricate and perfectly balanced as one of his own spreadsheets. He looked at his faint reflection in the building's glass. He barely recognized the man staring back. The fog of despair had lifted, replaced by the cold, clear light of purpose. The storm now had its lightning. A lesser man, upon receiving a king's ransom, might have immediately bought the symbols of the life he craved. A fast car to eclipse Julian's Porsche. A larger house to mock Eleanor's suburban palace. A new wardrobe to shed the skin of the Invisible Man. But Ethan was not a lesser man. He was an accountant. And he understood that true power was not in what you displayed, but in what you controlled. The money did not change his life. It clarified his purpose. He still drove his sensible sedan to work. He still packed his own lunch. He still endured Sarah's growing indifference and the oppressive atmosphere of their home. From the outside, nothing had changed. But on the inside, a quiet, methodical revolution had begun. He was no longer balancing the books of Sterling Corp. He was preparing to balance the scales of his own life. His grief, which had been a vast, foggy swamp, had now crystallized into a single, hard diamond of resolve. His first move was not on the stock market, but in the shadowy world of private intelligence. He knew he couldn't simply hire the first name he found online. Amateurs left tracks. He needed a ghost, someone as invisible and meticulous as he was. He used the access his uncle's accounts provided, delving into networks of corporate security and discreet fixers. He vetted 3 different firms, running his own background checks on their principals, until he found the one he wanted. The firm was run by a man named Marcus Thorne, a former military intelligence officer whose reputation for discretion was legendary. They met not in a sterile office, but on a park bench overlooking a gray, choppy river. Thorne was a man who seemed to have no distinguishing features, a human embodiment of the gray fog around them. Ethan didn't waste time with emotional stories of betrayal. He approached it like a business proposal. "I need a complete workup on a man named Julian Vance," Ethan said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not interested in hotel room photos. That's tabloid fodder. I want a full financial, professional, and personal audit. I want to know every credit card he uses, every private account he holds, every bad investment he's made. I want to know his vices, his debts, his political connections, and his corporate enemies. I want to know what he fears. I am not looking for evidence of an affair. I am looking for leverage." Thorne listened without expression, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. When Ethan was finished, Thorne gave a single, slow nod. "We'll provide you with a blueprint to the man's soul," he said. "It will be expensive." Ethan simply replied, "The budget is not a concern." While Thorne's team began to quietly dissect Julian's life, Ethan began his own assault. He became a student of his own company. At night, after Sarah was asleep, he would turn his small home office into a war room. He wasn't just an accountant at Sterling Corp anymore. He was a spy. He used his low-level access to pull years of financial reports, shareholder filings, and internal audits. He studied the company's structure, its debt load, its key stakeholders. He learned the names of every board member, every major investor, and every potential ally or enemy in a future corporate battle. Then, he began to build his army. Using the vast, labyrinthine network of his uncle's offshore accounts, he began to create a series of shell corporations. They had names designed to be utterly forgettable: Apex Consolidated Group, Maritime Logistics Solutions, Silverstream Holdings. They were ghosts, existing only as digital letterheads in tax havens around the globe. Through this phantom network, he began to buy. He never purchased large blocks of Sterling Corp stock that would trigger SEC alarms. He bought in small, irregular increments, from dozens of different brokers, through his various ghost companies. One day, Apex Consolidated would buy a few thousand shares. The next, Silverstream would purchase a few more. It was a slow, painstaking process, a death by 1,000 cuts. The market would see only normal, insignificant trading activity. No one would see the single, coordinating intelligence behind it all. No one would see the invisible man, sitting in his quiet suburban home, slowly, silently, becoming the company's largest single shareholder. His days became a masterclass in duality. At work, he was the same quiet, reliable Ethan. He kept his head down, he delivered his reports on time, he endured the casual condescension of his superiors. Julian passed him in the hallway one morning, clapping him on the shoulder. "Grant, just the man. Make sure those expense reports from the Singapore trip are flawless, will you? We don't want any pennies unaccounted for." Julian winked, as if sharing a joke at Ethan's expense. Ethan just nodded. "Of course, Mr. Vance." He didn't say that he already knew, thanks to Thorne's preliminary report, that Julian had used the Singapore trip to secretly funnel $50,000 of corporate money into a private account under his mistress's name. At home, he played the part of the oblivious, emotionally distant husband. Sarah would talk on the phone with her mother, her voice bright and animated. Then she would hang up, and the light would leave her face, and she would turn to Ethan with a sigh, as if his very presence was a burden. "Julian is taking his whole executive team to a ski retreat in Aspen next month," she'd say, a bitter edge to her voice. "Must be nice." Ethan would just shrug. "Sounds cold." He gave them nothing. He was a blank wall, a gray rock. And behind that placid facade, the architect of their destruction was meticulously drawing his blueprints. Late one night, in his office, he pinned a large shareholder chart of Sterling Corp to the wall. He began to shade in the portions he now controlled. The fragmented, multicolored chart was slowly, piece by piece, turning a single, solid color. His color. He was not a visionary. He was a bookkeeper. And he was about to balance the books with a precision that would leave them all at a net worth of zero. For weeks, Ethan's life was a study in controlled patience. He continued his silent acquisition of Sterling Corp, his phantom companies devouring shares on the open market. He continued to play the part of the meek accountant and the oblivious husband. He was an actor in a play of his own design, waiting for a crucial prop to be delivered. The call from Marcus Thorne came on a rainy Thursday morning. The message was simple and devoid of embellishment. The preliminary report is complete. A courier will deliver a package to a secure box under your designated pseudonym. The key has been left for you at the agreed-upon location. There was no room for error, no chance of interception. It was the work of a professional. That evening, Ethan retrieved a small, heavy, and deceptively plain package. He didn't open it in his car or at his home. He drove to the small, anonymous office he now rented, a sterile space that had become his true sanctuary, his war room. Under the harsh glare of a single desk lamp, he broke the seal. Inside was not a stack of grainy photographs. It was a meticulously organized dossier, bound in black, with a single encrypted hard drive nestled in a foam cutout. The first section was labeled Personal Surveillance. Ethan's hand was steady as he slid the photographs out. His heart did not race. He felt a strange, clinical detachment, as if he were auditing the accounts of a stranger. The pictures were of a brutally high quality. There was Sarah and Julian at a secluded corner table in a restaurant so exclusive, Ethan had only ever read about it. Sarah was laughing, her head thrown back, a diamond necklace glittering at her throat, a necklace he had never seen before. There was a shot of them leaving a five-star hotel, their arms linked, Julian's hand resting possessively on her hip. They looked like a power couple, radiating wealth and smug satisfaction. He saw photos of them at a weekend wine-tasting event in Napa, a trip Sarah had claimed was a mandatory leadership seminar. He saw them browsing in a luxury car dealership. He saw them kissing, a deep and passionate kiss in the front seat of Julian's Porsche, parked in a darkened corner of the very office garage Ethan used every day. He methodically examined each photo. He noted the dates and times, cross-referencing them in his mind with the lies she had told him. The leadership seminar, the late-night budget crisis, the dinner with an old college friend. The web of deceit was intricate, but like any poorly managed ledger, it was full of holes. He felt a flicker of something, not pain, but a deep, mournful disappointment for the man he used to be, the man who had believed all those lies because he had wanted to. That man was now well and truly dead. He closed the photo section. The emotional betrayal was confirmed. Now it was time for the unvarnished truth. He inserted the encrypted drive into his laptop. A file structure appeared, organized with the same precision as one of his own financial models. Folders were labeled falsified expense reports, offshore transfers, shell corporation analysis, and asset tracing. This was Thorne's true masterpiece. This was the blueprint to Julian's soul. Ethan clicked open the first file. It was a collection of Julian's corporate expense reports from the past 2 years. Ethan's blood ran cold. He recognized the forms. He had processed dozens of them himself. He saw the receipts from the exclusive restaurant in the photograph, submitted under the category of client dinner, Henderson account. He saw the 5-star hotel bill, itemized and approved, listed as lodging for foreign investors. The Napa Valley getaway, complete with spa treatments and private tours, had been billed to the company as market research and competitor analysis. The lies weren't just for him. They were for the company, for the shareholders, for every employee who worked an honest day for an honest wage. And then he saw it, a receipt from a high-end jewelry store for one diamond necklace. The charge was hidden within a larger invoice from a trade show vendor, a classic embezzlement technique. It was the same necklace Sarah was wearing in the photograph. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Sarah wasn't just the recipient of Julian's affections. She was the recipient of stolen goods. The beautiful, glittering life she was living with Julian was not just built on a foundation of lies told to her husband, but on a foundation of fraud and theft from the very company that employed them both. He, Ethan, had been an unwitting accomplice. His signature, his stamp of approval as a junior accountant, was likely on the periphery of some of these fraudulent transactions, a mark of his own gullibility. Julian hadn't just made a fool of him in his home. He had made him a pawn in his crimes at the office. He spent the next 3 hours digging deeper. He traced the money from a corporate slush fund to a shell company Julian had set up in Delaware, which then paid the lease on a luxury apartment downtown, an apartment Ethan now knew was their secret meeting place. He found evidence of Julian using company resources to day trade, covering his losses with falsified invoices. The picture that emerged was not of a charismatic business visionary. It was of a common grifter, a parasite in a $1,000 suit, slowly bleeding his own company dry to fund a life he hadn't truly earned. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating his face. The dossier lay open on his desk. The pain he had felt was gone. The sadness was gone. Even the anger felt too hot, too emotional for the moment. In its place was a cold, pure, and profound contempt. They weren't tragic, star-crossed lovers. They weren't a romantic story of two people finding each other. They were just cheap. They were criminals, defined by a shallow and desperate greed. His quest for revenge no longer felt like a personal vendetta born of a broken heart. It felt like a public service. It was no longer about winning back his wife or his dignity. It was about cleansing. It was about taking out the trash. And Ethan Grant, the meticulous man of numbers, was about to conduct the most thorough and final audit of their lives. The dossier from Marcus Thorne did not break Ethan, it completed him. It was the final, missing component in the machine he was building. The knowledge it contained, the cold, hard proof of their personal and professional corruption, acted as a strange kind of armor. His pain, his humiliation, his grief, these were weaknesses. The pure, unvarnished truth was strength. Armed with this strength, his life became a performance. He was no longer a victim, enduring a painful reality. He was a deep-cover operative, a master of espionage in the theater of his own life. His mission? To maintain the facade of the beaten, oblivious man they all believed him to be, while his invisible hand guided their world toward a cliff's edge. His home, once a place of quiet heartbreak, became his primary stage. The nightly dinners with Sarah transformed from agonizing trials into fascinating character studies. He watched her, not as a husband watches a wife, but as a scientist observes a specimen under a microscope. One evening, she was scrolling through her phone, a small, secret smile on her face that he knew was not for him. "God, this house is so boring," she said with a sigh, looking at the familiar beige walls. "I was looking at this design blog Julian sent me. He's thinking of redecorating his apartment. You should see the place, Ethan. Marble countertops, floor-to-ceiling windows. It's like something out of a magazine." Ethan took a slow sip of water. He knew from Thorne's report that the lease on that very apartment was paid for by a shell company funded by Sterling Corp's embezzled marketing budget. He even knew the name of the interior designer Julian had hired, and how much she was over-invoicing the company for her services. "Sounds expensive," Ethan said, his voice a perfect replica of his usual cautious tone. "I hope he's getting a good deal." "It's not about a good deal, Ethan," Sarah scoffed, the condescension thick in her voice. "It's about living. It's about having a life that isn't measured in discount coupons and mortgage payments." She looked at him then, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You just don't get it." "No," Ethan said, looking down at his plate. "I guess I don't." But inside, a voice, cold and clear, whispered, "Oh, I get it all, and you're going to pay for every square foot of that stolen marble." He was not enduring the insult, he was recording it, filing it away in the ledger of their crimes. Each barb she threw was simply another asset he would eventually seize. The corporate theater of Sterling Corp was an even more surreal stage. He was surrounded by people who had no idea that a financial titan was walking among them, disguised as a junior accountant. The power he wielded was so immense, so absolute, yet so completely invisible that he sometimes felt a dizzying sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie of his own life. One afternoon, he was called into a budget meeting with Julian and a few other senior managers. Julian was in his element, pacing in front of a whiteboard, radiating charisma. He was outlining a bold new restructuring plan. Ethan listened, his face a mask of neutral concentration, while he recognized the plan for what it was: a sophisticated scheme to strip assets from a profitable division and sell them to a company secretly owned by one of Julian's friends at a fraction of their value. It was theft on a grand, corporate scale. At one point, Julian paused and pointed a marker at Ethan. "And Grant here will be instrumental. His team will handle the due diligence, package the numbers so they look appealing to the board. We need your best work on this, Ethan. Make it look clean. Make it look sensible." The other managers smirked. The subtext was clear. "You, the boring numbers guy, will provide the cover for my brilliant, predatory move." "Of course, Mr. Vance," Ethan said, making a note on his legal pad. "I'll make sure the financials are airtight." The irony was so thick he could taste it. He would indeed make them airtight. He would prepare a second, secret report, a perfect, detailed analysis of the fraud being committed, complete with all the evidence Thorne had provided. A report that would be delivered not to the board, but to the district attorney at the perfect moment. This double life was not a strain. It was a source of profound, cold-burning energy. Every morning, he put on his costume, the slightly worn suit, the tired expression, the air of quiet defeat. He absorbed their condescension, their pity, their casual cruelty, and he metabolized it into fuel. Their arrogance was the single greatest asset in his portfolio. They were so utterly convinced of his insignificance that they grew careless. They discussed sensitive information in front of him, assuming he lacked the context to understand it. Julian would brag about his exploits, Sarah would complain about her boring life, and Eleanor would continue her campaign of 1,000 cuts, all while the man they were dismissing was methodically buying the ground from beneath their feet. He was the ghost at their feast, the silent arbiter of their fate. They were all already bankrupt, their lives already in foreclosure. The paperwork had been filed, the judgment had been rendered. All that remained was for the man they never bothered to see to serve them the eviction notice. And he would do it with the same quiet, emotionless efficiency with which he balanced a spreadsheet. The time for stealth was coming to an end. For months, Ethan had been a phantom in the marketplace, a whisper in the trading terminals, accumulating his power in the quiet shadows of financial anonymity. His network of ghost companies had performed their task flawlessly, their combined holdings in Sterling Corp growing from a negligible fraction to a formidable position. He was already the largest shareholder, a silent king whose influence was felt in the stock's unusual stability, even if his identity remained a mystery. But influence was not the goal. The goal was absolute control. The final phase of his plan required him to step from the shadows and execute a move so swift and decisive that his enemies would be checkmated before they even realized the game had changed. The architect's blueprints were complete. It was time to lay the foundation stone of his new empire. The operation began on a Monday morning. Wall Street was just waking up, but Ethan had been awake for hours in his secret office, a constellation of monitors casting a blue glow on his face. This would not be a death by 1,000 cuts. This was a blitzkrieg. Coordinated through his legal team and a series of trusted brokers his uncle had used for decades, he initiated a wave of block purchases. The orders flooded the market simultaneously from a dozen different sources, a financial shock and awe campaign designed to overwhelm any possible response. The stock price for Sterling Corp surged. On the trading floor of the company itself, a quiet panic began to ripple through the executive wing. Julian Vance, who viewed the stock price as a daily referendum on his own genius, was initially ecstatic, seeing it as market validation of his leadership. But his analysts were frantic, unable to identify the buyer. The volume was too high, the sources too diffuse. It was an attack from all directions at once. They were searching for a single corporate raider, a rival firm making a hostile bid. They never once thought to look at the quiet accountant on the 5th floor, the man who was at that very moment sipping his coffee and watching their world being bought out from under them on a secure data feed. By noon, it was over. An alert chimed softly on Ethan's main screen. The final trade was executed. A new line of data solidified, a number he had been working towards for months. 52%. He now owned a controlling interest in Sterling Corp, The company, its assets, its employees, and its future were his. He felt a quiet, profound calm. There was no elation, no surge of triumphant joy. It was simply the logical conclusion of a complex equation. He had balanced the ledger, but the financial victory was only one part of the plan. He wanted more than just their company. He wanted their world. He wanted the very stage upon which they had performed their arrogance and his humiliation. His next target was not a competitor, but a real estate investment trust called Blackwood Properties. To the world, Blackwood was just another faceless entity on the stock exchange. But Ethan knew, from his meticulous research, that its crown jewel was the 40-story glass and steel skyscraper in which they all worked, the Blackwood Tower. Owning the company made him their boss. Owning the building would make him their landlord. The symbolism was too perfect to resist. They would work in his building, eat in his cafeteria, ride in his elevators. They would be tenants in his reality, their presence permitted only by his grace. The acquisition of Blackwood Properties was a different kind of war. It wasn't a silent infiltration. It was a demonstration of overwhelming force. Instructed by Ethan, Mr. Finch and his legal team approached Blackwood's board not with a negotiation, but with an ultimatum. He made an all-cash offer to buy the entire trust, a figure so far above its market valuation that it was financially irresponsible for the board to refuse. It was a statement. It was the kind of raw, brutal power play that Julian Vance dreamed of making. The board, stunned by the sheer audacity and scale of the anonymous offer, convened an emergency meeting. Within 72 hours, they had accepted. The deal was signed. The funds, drawn from the deepest wells of Arthur Pendleton's fortune, were transferred. Ethan was sitting in his cubicle, reviewing a fraudulent expense report Julian had submitted, when his personal phone buzzed with a text message from Mr. Finch. It contained only 5 words. "The building is yours, sir." Ethan slowly looked up from the fabricated numbers on his screen. He looked at the cheap, gray fabric of his cubicle wall. He listened to the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. He felt the subtle vibration of the elevator moving in the central shaft. He owned it, all of it. The steel skeleton beneath the floors, the miles of wiring in the walls, the very air he was breathing. The sense of power was absolute, a silent, elemental force that filled him completely. The ghost now owned the machine. All the pieces were now in place. All he needed was the perfect stage for the final reveal. The next morning, it was delivered to him. An email appeared in his inbox, sent to all employees. It was an invitation to a company-wide town hall meeting the following Friday. The subject line read, "A bold new vision for Sterling Corp." The sender was Julian Vance. Julian was planning to use the meeting to unveil his triumphant restructuring plan, the very scheme Ethan now had the evidence to prove was a massive fraud. It was perfect. Julian was building his own gallows, sending out engraved invitations for his own execution. A small, cold smile, the first genuine smile in almost a year, touched Ethan's lips. The architect was finished. The demolition was on the schedule, and the entire company would have a front-row seat. The day of the reckoning dawned bright and clear, a crisp autumn Friday that felt deceptively ordinary. But in 3 separate locations across the city, the key players in a quiet war prepared for its final, public battle. In a sprawling penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Julian Vance selected his suit for the day. He chose a dark, custom-tailored charcoal wool, the kind of suit that didn't just suggest power, but radiated it. He practiced his speech in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror, his gestures broad and confident, his smile perfectly calibrated for maximum charm. This was not just a town hall meeting. It was his coronation. The board, foolish and complacent, had approved his restructuring plan. The markets were buoyant. His enemies were non-existent. He was a master of the universe, and today he would remind everyone of that fact. After today, the company would be leaner, more profitable, and shaped entirely in his image. He was a visionary, a titan, and the world was about to be his. Miles away, in a quiet suburban house that felt more like a museum of a failed marriage than a home, Sarah was also preparing. She stood before her own closet, pushing aside sensible dresses and blouses until she found the one she wanted, a sharp crimson dress that was bold and unapologetically expensive. It was a dress for the woman she was about to become, the wife of the most powerful man at Sterling Corp. She felt a thrill of anticipation so intense it was almost dizzying. She pictured the envious glances of her colleagues, the grudging respect from the other executives' wives. She and Julian had already talked about their future, the house in the Hamptons, the trips to Europe. All it took was this final, brilliant move by Julian. As she applied her makeup with a steady hand, Ethan walked into the bedroom to get his watch from the nightstand. She didn't turn. "Try to look tidy today, Ethan," she said, her eyes meeting his in the reflection of the mirror. Her tone was flat, a casual command to a subordinate. "It's an important day. Big changes are coming." "I know," he said, his voice revealing nothing. He strapped the simple, worn leather watch to his wrist, a relic from his father. It was the only thing of value he chose to wear that day. Ethan's own morning was an island of perfect, deliberate calm. He made his coffee, he ate his toast. He reviewed a single encrypted file on his laptop one last time before wiping it from the machine. There was no anxiety, no frantic energy. He felt the serene focus of a demolition expert who had already planted every charge, checked every wire, and was now simply waiting to press the button. He was the only person in the city who knew that Sterling Corp, as they knew it, had ceased to exist days ago. He was the only person who knew that the building they were all about to gather in now belonged to him. He was not going to a meeting, he was going to a foreclosure. At the office, the air was electric with rumor and speculation. Employees huddled by coffee machines, whispering about the big announcement. Most feared for their jobs. Julian's reputation for ruthless efficiency was well known. When he arrived, walking through the lobby with Sarah, a half step behind him, a wave of silence and awe followed him. He was a shark gliding through a school of fish. They went straight to his office, the door closing with a soft, final click. "Nervous?" he asked her, pouring them both a celebratory glass of champagne, even though it was barely 10 in the morning. "Excited," she corrected him, her voice breathy. "After this, nothing will be the same. First thing we do is clean house," Julian said, his voice hard. "That entire accounting department is dead weight. We'll outsource it. Starting with your husband. Consider it my gift to you." Sarah smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "Whatever you think is best, my love." While they toasted to their golden future, Ethan was in his cubicle, performing a quiet ritual. He deleted his personal files from his computer. He packed his few belongings, a framed photo of his parents, a favorite coffee mug, a well-thumbed book on economic theory, into a small cardboard box. He worked with a calm, unhurried efficiency that went completely unnoticed. People rushed past his desk, their faces tight with worry, their minds on the impending meeting. The invisible man was packing up his life, and no one saw a thing. An hour later, the auditorium was filled to capacity. The low thrum of nervous conversation filled the vast space. On a giant screen above the stage, a slick corporate video played on a loop, showing smiling employees and soaring stock charts. In the front row, Julian, Sarah, and the other senior executives took their reserved seats. Julian was the picture of confidence, shaking hands, clapping backs, a king holding court. Sarah sat beside him, her crimson dress a slash of color in a sea of corporate gray, her face glowing with triumph. She scanned the crowd of hundreds, a sea of anxious, upturned faces, and felt a surge of pity and power. They were the masses, she was the chosen. What she didn't see, what no one saw, was Ethan. He was not in the audience. He was not cowering in his seat, waiting for the axe to fall. He had arrived early, and, using a security override provided by the building's new unknown owner, had gained access to the backstage area and the audio-visual control booth. He had confirmed that the presentation he had uploaded to the master system was ready. He had verified that he had control of the microphones. The trap was set. The lights in the auditorium began to dim. The music swelled dramatically, and then faded, plunging the room into a hushed silence. The company's senior vice president of operations walked to the podium, her face beaming. "Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a truly historic day for Sterling Corp. It is my great honor to introduce a man whose leadership has been transformative and whose vision will now propel us into an incredible new future. Please join me in welcoming our President and CEO, Julian Vance. A wave of applause, a mixture of genuine enthusiasm and nervous obligation, filled the room. The spotlight hit Julian. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and gave Sarah a final, confident wink. This was his moment. He walked toward the stage, a king ascending to his throne, completely unaware that he was, in fact, a prisoner walking the last mile to his own execution. Julian Vance stood in the brilliant white glare of the stage lights, a conqueror on the eve of his greatest victory. He soaked in the applause, his smile a blinding display of perfect teeth and predatory confidence. He raised a hand, silencing the room with a practiced gesture. Thank you, he began, his voice resonating through the auditorium, smooth and hypnotic. Today is a landmark day. Today, we stop talking about the future, and we start building it. For too long, Sterling Corp has been held back by old ways of thinking, by inefficiencies, by dead weight. His eyes swept across the crowd, and a chill of fear ran through the employees. But a vision requires bold strokes. It requires courage. And it requires making the tough, necessary decisions that will propel us to greatness. In the front row, Sarah watched him, her heart pounding with adoration. This was the man she had chosen, a titan, a king. Every condescending word from her mother, every ounce of pity she had felt for Ethan's small, gray life, it had all led to this triumphant moment. Julian clicked the remote in his hand, ready to advance to the slide that would detail the coming layoffs, the tough decisions that would cement his power. And so, it is with great excitement that I unveil our new strategic direction. The giant screen behind him did not change. It flickered for a second, and then went completely, unnervingly black. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Julian frowned, a flash of irritation crossing his perfect face. He clicked the remote again, harder this time. Nothing. Apologies, everyone, he said with a tight, forced laugh. Seems our A divided by V team is having a bit of a performance issue. It was at that moment that a figure emerged from the deep shadows at the side of the stage. He moved without haste, his footsteps making no sound, yet every eye in the room was drawn to him. The man was not large, but he wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light around him, giving him an aura of impossible gravity. The crowd squinted, trying to place him. A consultant? A new board member? Then a wave of confused recognition spread through the room. It was the quiet guy, the numbers guy from the 5th floor. It was Ethan. Julian stared, his irritation instantly turning to incandescent rage. Grant, what in the hell do you think you're doing? Security. Get this man off my stage. But the 2 security guards standing at the foot of the stage remained motionless, their faces unreadable. Sarah, in the front row, felt a knot of confusion and dread tighten in her stomach. This made no sense. This was not part of the plan. Ethan walked directly to the podium, stopping beside the stunned CEO. He did not look at Julian. He looked out at the thousands of faces staring back at him. He leaned into the microphone. His voice, when it came, was not the quiet, hesitant mumble they were used to. It was clear, calm, and amplified to fill every corner of the vast room with an unshakable authority. There's been a change of plan. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Julian's for the first time. Thank you for warming up the crowd for me, Julian, but I'll be taking it from here. Before Julian could form a response, Ethan addressed the audience again. Good afternoon. My name is Ethan Grant. Many of you know me from the accounting department. What you don't know is that, as of this past Tuesday, my holding firm completed a 100% acquisition of Sterling Corporation and its parent company. I am the new chairman and owner of this company. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a single, unified sound of pure shock. Julian's face, which had been a mask of rage, collapsed into slack-jawed disbelief. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face, a cold, roaring sound filling her ears. It was impossible. It was a joke. It had to be. Mr. Vance, Ethan continued, his voice as sharp and cold as shattered glass, was about to present his vision for the future. But before we move forward, a final audit of the past is required. With that, the black screen behind them exploded to life. It was not a corporate logo. It was a crystal-clear photograph of Julian and Sarah, locked in a passionate kiss in the front seat of his Porsche. A wave of scandalized shouts and gasps swept through the auditorium. Sarah let out a small, choked sob, her hands flying to her mouth as hundreds of her coworkers turned to stare at her, their eyes wide with shock and judgment. Julian was frozen, paralyzed. But Ethan was just getting started. For the past year, Ethan's voice narrated calmly, as if presenting a business case. Mr. Vance has used this company as his own personal bank account, and he has been generous in sharing the spoils. Click. A new slide appeared. On the left, a copy of a receipt for a $30,000 diamond necklace billed to the company as promotional materials. On the right, a photo of Sarah at the company gala, smiling, wearing that exact necklace. Click. A slide of the falsified expense report for their Napa Valley seminar. Next to it, a candid shot of them, laughing, their wine glasses raised in a toast. Click. A complex flowchart, an accountant's nightmare, showing the illegal transfer of funds from Sterling Corp. Through a shell company in Delaware to the account that paid the lease on Julian's penthouse. The very penthouse Sarah had bragged about. Ethan presented it all. The fake invoices, the luxury hotel bills disguised as investor meetings, the stolen money. He laid their entire sordid affair and criminal conspiracy bare under the harsh, unforgiving lights for the entire company to witness. He used the cold, hard, and undeniable language of numbers, the very language they had so often mocked him for. Now, it was the language of their undoing. The room was a cacophony of outrage. Julian Vance, the titan, the visionary, stood exposed as a common thief. Sarah, the aspiring queen, was now just a pariah, the woman at the center of the ugliest scandal in the company's history. She was drowning in a sea of shame, her crimson dress feeling like a brand. Julian finally found his voice, a strangled, desperate whisper into the microphone. Lies, this is all. Fabricated, is it? Ethan asked calmly. All of these documents have been authenticated by my forensic accounting team and were submitted to the district attorney's office this morning. I believe they, and a team from the SEC, are waiting for you in your office right now. He turned from the broken man beside him and addressed the stunned crowd one last time. There will be changes. There will be a restructuring. But we will not be cutting the dead weight. We will be cutting out the cancer. Our work begins today. He looked directly at Julian, his voice dropping to a final, dismissive command. Security, please escort Mr. Vance from my stage and out of my building. The two guards moved forward, their expressions firm. As they took Julian by the arms, the once powerful CEO seemed to shrink, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. His reign was over. His judgment had been delivered. And the man who everyone had forgotten had just reminded them all of his name. The pandemonium that erupted in the auditorium was not loud and chaotic, but a dense, heavy wave of shocked silence, followed by a rising tide of furious, incredulous whispers. Julian Vance stood paralyzed on the stage, the brilliant spotlight that was meant to be his coronation now serving as an interrogation lamp. His face, usually a mask of effortless control, had crumbled into a grotesque mixture of horror and disbelief. When the two security guards placed firm hands on his arms, he didn't resist. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was just a man in an expensive suit, his soul hollowed out for all to see. As he was led from the stage, the crowd parted for him, not with respect, but with a morbid curiosity, as if he were a specimen in a jar. His walk of shame ended in the lobby, where two calm, grim-faced detectives were waiting for him. The click of handcuffs was the final, definitive sound of his downfall. Sarah was an island in a sea of judgment. As the employees began to file out of the auditorium, they gave her a wide berth, their eyes either avoiding her completely or lingering with a cold, unforgiving stare. Her crimson dress, chosen to signify her arrival, had become her scarlet letter. The future she had been toasting with champagne just an hour before had evaporated into a nightmare of public disgrace. She was left alone in the front row, the silence of the empty room, a roaring condemnation. Her lover was gone. Her reputation was annihilated. Her career was over. She had bet everything on the wrong man and had lost not only her future, but also the one man who had ever truly valued her, a man she had never bothered to see. In the weeks that followed, the dust settled, revealing a new landscape. Julian Vance was a permanent fixture in the financial news headlines, his name forever linked to words like fraud, embezzlement, and disgrace. His assets were frozen, his reputation in ruins. He was facing a federal indictment that would almost certainly send him to prison for a very long time. Sarah's divorce from Ethan was swift and brutal. The prenuptial agreement she had insisted upon years ago, designed to protect her from what she saw as his financial simplicity, now worked against her. His inheritance was his alone, a separate property untouched by their marriage. She was left with nothing. Her last known address was her mother Eleanor's pristine, silent house, a return to the gilded cage she had so desperately tried to escape, now a prisoner of the very values that had led to her ruin. Ethan did not take Julian's office for himself. He had no desire to sit on a throne built by a thief. Instead, he promoted a competent and widely respected senior vice president to the role of CEO, while he remained the silent, watchful chairman of the board. His first official act was to use the company's vast resources to give every non-executive employee a significant bonus and a raise, funded, as the memo wryly noted, by the recuperation of mismanaged executive assets. He was not a tyrant, he was a bookkeeper. He simply balanced the ledger. One evening, while sorting through the last of his Uncle Arthur's personal effects, Ethan found a false bottom in an old oak writing desk. Inside was a single, sealed envelope with his name written on it in a sharp, precise hand. He opened it. The letter was dated a month before his uncle's death. It read, "Ethan, if you are reading this, then the world has finally turned as it should. I did not get to know you well as a boy, for which I am sorry, but I have watched you from a distance for many years. I have watched you work, and I have watched you love. I saw in you a meticulous mind, a quiet strength, and a deep well of integrity. I also saw a familiar story unfolding, the story of a good man being devoured by the shallow and the greedy. 50 years ago, my own partner and the woman I loved did to me what has been done to you. They stole my company, my future, and my faith in people, leaving me with nothing. I spent the rest of my life rebuilding, not for the sake of wealth, but for the sake of balancing the scales. I never found a person worthy of inheriting that balance until I saw you. I did not leave you money, Ethan. Money is just a tool. I left you a sword, forged in the fires of my own betrayal. This was not a gift of chance, it was a targeted delivery of justice. A debt the universe owed to men like us. Use it to restore the balance. Your uncle, Arthur." Ethan folded the letter, the old paper soft in his hands. He finally understood. This was never about revenge. It was about an inheritance of a different kind. It was a legacy of justice, passed from one quiet, underestimated man to another. He walked to the vast window of his new office, the one he had chosen, a modest but comfortable space, and looked down at the glittering city lights. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel anger. He felt only a profound and lasting peace. The books were balanced. His name was his own again. Never underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. For when they finally choose to speak, their voice is not a word, but a verdict. Thank you for listening to this story from GIADINUS. Justice takes many forms, and sometimes it is delivered by the very hands we choose to ignore. Join us again for our next story.